Hey everyone, it's Reed. I want to say thanks so much for listening to the home front and keeping us growing. Here's what I need you to do. After you're done listening or while you're listening, I need you to go and rate this 5 stars. Guys, you give us those ratings, more people see us, more people listen, and the movement grows. Please give the home front a 5-star rating today. And as always, thanks for listening. And now, on with the show. Welcome back to the home front. I'm your host, Reed Galen. Today, I'm joined by Annie Karni and Luke Broadwater, who are the authors of Madhouse: How Donald Trump, MAGA Mean Girls, a former used car salesman, a Florida Nepo baby, and a man with rats in his walls broke Congress, which was published just in March of this year and available wherever fine books are sold. Annie is a congressional correspondent for the New York Times. She joined the Times in 2018 and was previously a White House correspondent covering both the Trump and Biden administrations. Before that, she worked for Politico, where she covered the 2016 presidential election, and also the New York Post and the New York Daily News, covering local politics. Luke is now a White House correspondent for the New York Times, where he has profiled congressional leaders, investigated federal spending, and played a key role in the paper's coverage of the January 6th attack on the Capitol. Prior to joining the Times, Luke worked for nearly a decade at the Baltimore Sun, where he was the lead reporter on a series of investigative articles that won the 2020 Pulitzer Prize for local reporting and a George Polk Award for political reporting. Today, they're both coming to us from Washington, D.C. Annie and Luke, welcome to the show.
Good morning.
Hello. Thanks for having us.
All right, let me ask a very broad and probably uncomfortable question. How do you cover these people every day? I mean, if all life is high school, then this is like the worst high school there was ever. Like, I was a page there in 1993 when I was 17, and the woman who ran the page program back then said, quote, "Members of Congress are their lowest form of political life." Like, that was 30 years ago, guys. So, like, how is it now that, like, what used to be the nerds, right? These people came because they believed in governance and everything else, has now become like the reform school, right? Like, these are the kids who couldn't hack it at the regular high school.
I've actually moved on to the White House beat, so it's a whole nother group of people to cover. But I actually loved covering Congress. I mean, I had no problem covering all stripes of political people in the House and the Senate. You know, you have some very serious people in Congress who work to do a good job. But really, what our book documents is how the place has become uh, very much more unserious. And we chart throughout a number of chapters how that happened, how the um, people who used to be in the backbench, people who were the bomb throwers, people who just like to start fights and grab headlines, how they actually took over the House and became the driving force behind what happens in our nation capital. And we lay out in great detail how that happens. And so that's one of the big points of the book, is how the House became a more unserious place and was taken over by really people who in almost any other walk of life would not have a leadership position, but in this one chamber in the nation's capital have all the power.
And Luke, before I get to Annie, I would venture to say that there's, at least from my opinion, there's a lot of that at the White House as well. In an otherwise normal world, these people would be given no actual positions of responsibility, as we continue to see at that big 5-sided building across the Potomac.
There's a reason Mitch McConnell voted against Pete Hegseth, right? Like, he, in earlier iteration of the Republican Party, a president wouldn't go to a Fox News host to run the Defense Department. It would be somebody who'd built their way up, had earned, multiple stars as a general, or proven themselves leading large agencies. And so we're in a very different time in American politics right now.
And so, Annie, back to the book, you spend a fair amount of time on Gaetz, right? Like, Matt Gaetz is odious to me, but like, he's not stupid, right? He's not a dumb guy. Like, he's very clear about what he was doing and why he was doing it. But, that's the kind of thing, to Luke's point, is, Gates came as the chubby guy with the flat hair and left as like Beavis or Butthead. I'm not sure which one it is, right? With too much Botox and, dreams and aspirations of either being attorney general or the governor of Florida. To Luke's earlier point, again, things that like someone like Gates, right, would never have had the opportunity to do maybe even 12 or 14 years ago.
Gaetz is a main character in our book because he was the driver of a lot of the drama. of the last Congress. And yeah, I'd say that most of his colleagues would also describe him as odious. Most of his Republican colleagues. One person described him to us in the book as like textbook sociopath. But he's, as you said, he was really quite a talented person for this Congress. He was like uniquely suited to this Trump moment. He took to it like a fish to water. And what he does differently than what a Marjorie Taylor Greene or a Lauren Boebert does is like he really understood how to whip members and bring along members with him and create a coalition. So, he ousted Kevin McCarthy, and he was able to do that because he quietly tended to this small group of far right lawmakers throughout the Congress. And like that's something that a leader learns how to do. That's what the speaker has to do. Kind of like tend to members, know what they want, know how to get them on board with something. And Matt Gaetz could do that, which made him very, very powerful, especially in this world we live in with tiny margins. You need a group of like he had a group of 6, then 8 that ousted Kevin McCarthy. That's all he needed. So I would say that Matt Gaetz was a great character to write about. I mean, he's just so colorful, smart. Smart people are sometimes more fun to write about just because their machinations are interesting. And he ultimately, he's out now. He's living in California. But in this world, I would never count anyone out for good. I would say it's like a pause and we'll see what comes next for him. But he probably is plotting a way back to more relevance, I would guess. Oh, but wait, to answer your question though, Matt Gaetz is someone who I think that he, smart enough that if it was a different Republican Party, he might have become something else. I don't know.
But that's cynicism then, right?
Yes, yeah, but then there's, like I think he's a little different from Marjorie Taylor Greene or Lauren Boebert, also 2 main characters of our book who I don't think could ever be anything else. They're only here because this is what Congress is now. I think Matt Gaetz could have existed in a lot of different Congresses.
To your point, his dad was a politician, right? So like he grew up in it. But again, that inherent nature of understanding the needs, wants, whims, which is something, frankly, ironically, McCarthy was never good at. And I remember McCarthy going back to my time in California. Like his main thing, guys, was he was able to just raise boatloads of cash,
Yes,
right? So he was a
yes.
leader of that, but he was a terrible whip. He was an awful whip. And he wasn't a great leader. And he was a speaker, look, and he was willing to do anything. And of course, that's what made him so vulnerable to guys like Gaetz and ultimately people like Nancy Mace, too, which is like they bent him over the barrel and then they broke him over the barrel.
Yeah, McCarthy had what someone in our book described as like he was just always surviving the day. And he had like, oh yeah, Ken Buck, who no longer is in Congress, but describing to us it's like pain aversion. Like, what do I have to do to put off the pain today? Like whatever comes tomorrow, I'll deal with that tomorrow. I don't want to have pain today, so I will do this and, give away this power because it lets me survive the day. And that worked for a lot. He kind of danced his way through until he couldn't anymore. And then the pain caught up with him. And that's what happened there.
It makes it very difficult for a speaker, really of either party with a 4 or 5 seat margin, to really have a coherent legislative agenda. Right. I mean, I think that the Biden administration did a heck of a lot of things, all things considered, given the margins they had in the 2.5 or 3 years they were really successful legislatively. But for a guy like Mike Johnson now, right? I mean, I'm not thinking he's like surviving the day, right? I don't think he's going to get ousted. But at the same time, he's got to be under incredible pressure from your beat at the White House to get this stuff done. Right. And like, I mean, guys, we're in such a crazy time. Like you get Stefanik getting her nomination pulled because they can't lose the seat. And they're like the Republicans are breathing this really creepy sigh of relief because a couple of Democrats have died. Right. Like, I mean, that's an untenable sort of place to govern from.
Well, we went from one of the most productive Congresses in recent memory, which was the 117th, that passed all sorts of big legislation, right? And the Biden administration and Chuck Schumer and many Democrats feel they never got proper credit for everything they did with the infrastructure bill and Chips and Science Act and all these really big, tough bills.
That's the difference between Democrats and Republicans. Democrats are afraid to take proper credit because they think it's ugly. And what they forget is that they're politicians and everybody expects them to be that way.
Yeah, and so you went from like a Congress that really got a lot of things done to what we posit was the most dysfunctional Congress in modern history in the 118th. They passed the fewest bills since the Great Depression. They were constantly fighting with each other. They were the first Congress to kick out a speaker and then go 3 weeks basically as a functionless body during the time when the October 7th attack happened. And so they really rendered the House inoperable and dysfunctional in a way we hadn't seen before. And that's why we thought it was so important to really document exactly what happened with the 118th Congress and how it broke so badly. And why that's important is because it sets up what's happening today, right? It sets up the Mike Johnson speakership. You learn in the book how Mike Johnson becomes the speaker, how he relies increasingly on Donald Trump as his source of power and his source of strength, and how he almost becomes sort of like I think Annie used the phrase, a junior staffer to Trump, not like a co-equal branch of government where they're going to be a check on Trump and hold him accountable. And if there's, people doing a signal chat, they're going to do an investigation. Those things have all went away. And so we explain to the reader really how we got into the current state of our body politic and why the House is the way the House is right now.
But Annie, I mean, you've covered the Hill for a long time. I mean, my dad worked on the Hill for a million years, right? All the way through Gingrich's speakership. And, there was a time in living memory when there were conference committees, right? Like there was a budget, right? Like they worked through these appropriations bills, whatever it was, 12 of them, right? And then they had to pass a budget. And then we came to like the land of the government shutdown and sequestration and all this other stuff. And now regular order is, out the window. And, now we have to have reconciliation. And is reconciliation going to get thrown off by the frickin' parliamentarian of the Senate? It's this kind of thing where, to Luke's point, the dysfunction is the only thing that like is a constant threat at this point.
Right. We live in a world where basically Congress is always dealing with the ever looming government shutdown. It's always like somehow we've been putting it off now for a few rounds, but it's always looming and it's always kicking the can down the road and just dealing with it again in 6 months or whatever. But yeah, what we document in our book is that when they're not doing anything, these lawmakers get a little bit confused and start to think that the petty fights and censuring each other and ousting each other is the job, because there's not any mitigating, actual policy or substance that they're actually doing. At least that was the case in the 118th Congress. So this factionalism and petty fights became sort of the job and took over a lot of their thinking and made it, like you said, like kind of like high school. And it made it quite a rich reporting place because of the factions and everyone hates each other. It makes them want to talk to reporters. So that's good for us.
I have an expression I think is pretty true for MAGA, which is the only people they hate more than me are each other.
Oh yeah. I mean, that's actually a running theme in the book. Like there's some weird friendships, like Lauren Boebert and Jamie Raskin are actually very close friends. Lauren Boebert and Marjorie Taylor Greene certainly hate each other more than either of them hate AOC. I mean, yes, they hate their most vicious thoughts and feelings are saved for each other, for sure.
Explain the Boebert-Raskin friendship to me. Years ago, right, everybody made a lot of like the Antonin Scalia and Ruth
Yes,
Bader Ginsburg, but
right.
they were both like very esteemed jurists. Like Jamie Raskin is a very thoughtful, very smart, like constitutionalist, and Lauren Boebert is not.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's just a factual statement. They serve on the oversight committee together. They sit next to each other. And sometimes, humans are like, this is what I like about our book. We kind of highlight the human side of these lawmakers. Like they just sort of, you drop all the political views and she would show him pictures of of her grandson and he loves babies. And they sort of just like got along as human to human and actually developed quite a close friendship. Raskin said to us for our book, like, it's like the Beatles or the Rolling Stones. You have to choose Marjorie or Lauren, and we're all Boebert people here.
Because here's the thing is like Boebert, for all of her weirdness, there is, and I don't find it, but I can see it. There is a strange, endearing nature to her.
Yeah,
right.
I think that's right.
She's like
Yes.
goofy. How did she end up here? How does she survive? And Greene is just nasty and awful.
So even internally, Boebert's pretty popular. She has friendships. Her colleagues in the Freedom Caucus like her. She's well liked among Democrats and Republicans on the Hill. Like, doesn't have great relationships with reporters, but whatever. Marjorie Taylor Greene isn't on an island. I mean, she doesn't really have allies. I think so that kind of comes across that they just have different personalities and different ways of doing this, even though like ideologically they're pretty the same. Their styles are very different. And yeah, I think there is look, Lauren Boebert, as we outline in the book, she's a high school dropout who got carted around by her mom, like who was divorced and had abusive relationships. She got pregnant as a teen. Like she is not someone you would ever expect to be here. And yet here she is. There's something sort of compelling about that story.
68% of the country doesn't go to college, right? So she actually represents the vast majority of the country.
Right. And then Marjorie Taylor Greene is a very wealthy woman from Georgia who owns her ex-husband owned a construction company. It's just a little like if you just talk about like the narrative, I think there's more to kind of, one is a little more sympathy inducing.
Or even empathy inducing.
Yeah, empathy inducing, yeah.
But Luke, I mean, that's the one thing is like for Greene, like she sold out for McCarthy. She said, I'm going to be all in for Kevin, right? This is going to be my path. He's going to survive this stuff. And obviously that doesn't work. I mean, just as we're recording this, right, Pope Francis has just passed away. She posts this awful, like completely unnecessary thing, right, about the death of a very old Catholic man, right? Like to Annie's point, Lauren Boebert is never going to be my cup of tea, but I can understand it. I can also understand why no one wants to hang out with Marjorie Taylor Greene.
Yeah, I mean, she has a real mean streak, right? And like, I mean, even we take you inside the room many times where Marjorie Taylor Greene is clashing with different people, and we also document how she hitches her wagon to Kevin McCarthy's train, and that obviously fails miserably. And so, like, and there's that scene in the book where Lauren Boebert decides to vote with all the Democrats to actually silence Marjorie Taylor Greene for a day and not let her talk, right? And she's the only Republican who does that. And I think part of that is because she does have that friendship with Raskin, right? Like Raskin sent her baby clothes to her grandchild that said, "I may take a lot of naps, but I'm still woke." And so they have a little, they have a little
But that's
rapport.
funny, right? That's funny.
We asked her, like, wouldn't this be seen as bad to your constituency that you do have these relationships with Democrats? And she said, no, like that's part of my brand and my constituency is that I do work across the aisle and do some like environmental things and things for the district. And so she's not just this right-wing bomb thrower all the time, right? She has this other side to her. Whereas Marjorie Taylor Greene like relishes the mean-spirited fight in a real way. Like we have this scene in the book where she goes after Mike Johnson, and Johnson is like trying to win her over, and he brings her in to the speaker's office and they have one-on-one meetings about Ukraine funding. And he tries to win her over with logic and facts and reason. And he's given her the intelligence, and he asked her, like, Marjorie, have you ever been to Europe? And she says, no. And he says, Marjorie, have you ever been in the military? And she says, no. And he says, here's all the intelligence from our like 4-star generals, Trump guys. Like these are MAGA guys. Like this is what they're saying. And she basically tells them that he is a sellout and a dummy, and that all these people that he's listening to are all in the deep state, that the minute you gain access to intelligence or the intelligence community, you are therefore have lost all credibility, and that she plans to listen to the base regardless of what the intelligence says. And that's the fundamental like divide in the Republican Party. Like, do you listen to the experts? Do you listen to people with information, or do you just go with your gut feeling is and like the impulses of the voters, even if the voters have not been informed with the information that you have, right? And that's why we see we're at this clash today, I think.
I want to round out the Mean Girl Caucus with Nancy Mace, but before I do that, Annie, I want to go back to something that Luke was just referring to, which is a divide in the Republican Party. So, as an observer of the House, whether or not it's the 118th or now, which is, yes, there are divides. Yes, there are these instances, as you point out, with like a Boebert and a Raskin having a personal relationship, but 99 times out of 100. If Trump wants something, like they're going to go that way.
Oh, yeah.
So there's that
Yeah.
part. But also, let me ask you, as reporters, do you ever get frustrated or sick of the Republican member who is clearly conflicted on something that Trump is pushing, but won't go on the record to say it. There are people who say, we all get 18 million newsletters every morning saying, well, this could be the thing because Republicans on the Hill are very upset. But like, then when the time comes, like, they all just fall back into line. So like, how many times are we going to let the boy cry wolf?
Well, there's two different things. One is we see these far right members. I don't think this is what you're talking about, but there's one dynamic where we see far right members who pretend they're going to hold out against the president's agenda on spending and then cave at the last second. And they always cave. And that's just getting old as a narrative. Like, oh, are they going to break with Trump? Oh, they didn't. Like, I do have a bit of an eye roll now for having to cover like these far right members. They're really going to take a stand. They usually capitulate to Trump in the end. And usually what it takes is a phone call from the president and they are at the center of a news cycle. And then that's that. The other thing I think you were talking about is like these more on the Senate side, like these senators who privately like hold their noses at Trump and laugh at him behind his back and hate him and hate what he's doing, but like don't stand up to him. I mean, that's been the reality of the Republican Party now for almost a decade. They're scared of losing their jobs. They can't risk the wrath of not just the president, but the echo chamber of influencers who come after them and threaten them with a primary challenge if they look like they're standing up. And we spent some time with those people in the book too, like Russ Vogt and Steve Bannon. And I think that what we're witnessing now is kind of interesting in that if these Republicans like vote to cut Medicaid, like we're reaching a point where is there a moment where they're afraid they're going to lose their jobs no matter what? Because these policies are so unpopular with their voters that do we see a change? Like they'll stand up to him because they're going to lose their seat either way. I don't know. So that's like a new dynamic that the policies are so onerous on their own constituents that they're in a bind. And maybe we see a different reaction to the president.
And Annie Luke mentioned Russ Vogt, who's now director of OMB, right? And there was something, I don't remember, it wasn't y'all that wrote it, it was another outlet that said, oh, could the Republican Congress actually raise taxes on the wealthiest, right? And there was a part in there that said that people like J.D. Vance and Vogt are more dedicated to the nature of power, right? They want to be in charge. They want to control everything. And so, like, if doing something politically popular is going to be harder for these hyper wealthy people, like, they don't really care, right? Like, taxes are a means to an end, not an end in and of themselves. And then you've got Bannon, who like represents the masses, and he doesn't like Elon. And then you've got Musk over there, and he's finally like, oh shit, like my car company, which was overvalued anyway, is now being crushed because people are selling these things or not buying them. And so talk to us about that, because that's the other part too, is that with all of the clowns that you guys document, there are some very smart, there are a lot of very smart guys and gals who are doing this stuff with a very pointed purpose.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So, you know, not everybody covered in the book is a dummy, right? Like these are very in some cases very dedicated, smart, ambitious people who have chosen to become MAGA because that's the way to get ahead in the Republican Party. I think Vogt actually is a true believer, and in fact, he's one of the people who probably has brought the party more towards his line of thinking that has changed himself to become more like the party, right? He and we document that in the book how he wields a lot of influence, or used to, from this like small kind of dingy office off Capitol Hill, where the House Freedom Caucus guys would check in with him regularly to see what they should do, and even sort of moderate members in the Republican Party were in constant contact with Vogt, texting with him, and as they saw the debt ceiling negotiations in the last Congress. Now, Bannon, Vogt, one wing of the party, Musk kind of in line with them, but not really. We're seeing these nasty fights play out in public. Musk and Navarro, Musk and Rubio, there's a common theme that's Musk always fighting with everybody. So, his days may be numbered in the White House. Trump likes him. Trump still thinks he's like a big winner. Trump loves the idea of having the richest man in the world cow to him all the time. It It makes Trump feel more powerful and more successful as a businessman. So he likes having him around for that reason.
And there's a political aspect, which he's got $300 billion as of today, which he said he's willing to spend on the apostates, right?
Absolutely. In one argument, he maybe was the biggest person who helped Donald Trump to his second term, right, with all the money he pumped into the race. So, in our experience reporting this book, the MAGA wing of the Republican Party is always going to end up fighting with each other because fighting and conflict in the Donald Trump style is part of the brand. It's part of the appeal to the voters. They don't actually want everything to go real smooth and there not to be a lot of drama and entertainment in government. They want the drama and the fighting and the conflict as part of is the appeal of this wing of the party.
You mix the true believers like Vogt with the Leninists like Bannon, right? So Vogt has a perspective. Bannon's like, if you need me to light a fire, tell me where to, put the match. And then you got the rest of them who are just sort of, Annie along for the ride, right? Which is if this is the way I have to achieve power, notoriety, fame, money in this Republican Party, not the Republican Party I grew up in, certainly, then I'm willing to do that because here's the thing. And if it's a Ted Cruz or a Tom Cotton or a Hawley or any of those guys, mostly guys, but I'm sure there are some women too, or a DeSantis, right? They assume, well, Trump's going to die at some point, right? And, or if he doesn't, quote, run for a third term, then like what's going to be the most valuable commodity in a 2028 primary election if we have one, which is going to be Trump's endorsement, which he's already said doesn't sound like he wants to give to JD Vance because that would be so antithetical to him. So it's amazing to me, Annie, and maybe it shouldn't be anymore, like how long these guys have been willing to hold on to this, right? Of course, also they know in a primary election they can't win without the MAGA voter, right? They still need those people too.
We spent most time with house people for our books. So, like, I would put Elise Stefanik in that category you're talking about, of someone who, just made a calculation based on wanting a political future to go all in. And I would say that, after doing it for so long, I think you start to the difference between like a true believer and someone who, is a cynic, it's that line starts to blur. I just don't think that I think you stew enough in the hating the media, thinking it's unfair, and you start to come around. I don't know that after all these years, some of those people like Ted Cruz has had a long fraught relationship with Trump. Some of them might secretly think he's a mad king. I don't know. But I don't think that they any
They're not
longer
offended by it anymore.
they're not offended by the havoc he's wreaking anymore. I think that they've sort of come around to some extent.
So, Luke, I want to start on one end of Pennsylvania Avenue, and then Annie, I want to come to the other. So, as we're going through here, guys, like Luke, we're 93 days into this or whatever when folks hear this, and there's been a lot that's happened. And there's, in the next 90 days and the 90 days after that, there will be more. I take with a very big shaker of salt how much like bad poll numbers really affect Donald Trump, and certainly UMass Amherst had a survey out, I think, a couple of weeks ago that showed, in fact, his base is not splintering. There are some people that believe they're uncomfortable, but at the same time, Alex Theodoridis, who runs the survey, said in his analysis, like if there was an election tomorrow, they'd all go back to him, right? So, like, what's your sense of that? Because I think it's so much, and you guys have been there for these changes in paradigms, these multiple paradigm shifts. It just doesn't seem to me that like, screaming about, oh, Trump's at 41%, like that's good for him.
The polling showed that he was the most popular he had ever been in, since they started polling Trump early in this year. I think it's leveled off a little bit some now, it's going down. But he was extremely unpopular right after January 6th. And so he has really rehabilitated himself in the minds of many voters in his popularity. You're seeing a very different Trump term than the first time, right? Like in the first Trump term, there were serious established people in some of these leadership positions, General Mattis, McMaster, John Kelly, Gary Cohn. These are people who could push back on some of Trump's most extreme impulses. This second term, it's full of loyalists. It's full of people who were good on TV, who will do what Trump says. And so you can see how they're carrying out like his most extreme or maximalist agenda. And the only thing that's really blocked him so far from doing what he wants to do is either the courts or, in the one case, the bond market, right? Like the economy got so bad and it was so scary that he had to back off some of these tariffs, right? And so we are seeing some limits on what Trump will do, but he's like pushing what the president how much the president can change the country to his own vision in like all aspects of society that go well beyond what a normal White House would do, right? Like you kind of expect the president to change the government, but should he be changing the Smithsonian and the Kennedy Center and like private law firms and universities?
I don't know that his numbers have moved that dramatically. I mean, there's been some fall off, but I think that given all the actions, there's still the pollsters I've talked to have said that he's still getting credit with voters for taking action, even if they haven't registered yet that those actions are horrible for their lives. Prices are going up, not delivering on the economic promises he made them. They're still like he's doing things and he's getting credit with voters for that still. Like we'll see if the reality of the things he's doing sets in more. But for now that the shock and awe is still resonating with voters just for taking action and being, in their face. I've been writing about Democrats and how like they've actually been doing quite a bit. The question is like, what does it really add up to? And there's been some movement in Trump's numbers, but not drastic.
All right. Well, so let me take a gratuitous cheap shot then, because you opened the door for me, Annie, and you didn't know you were opening the door, but that's my fault, not yours. As your book, guys, was coming out, was right around the same time that Schumer voted with, was it 9 other Democrats to allow the continuing resolution to go through. And he's just like, this will be over, right? Like once we push him out of the system. And like, I wrote something which is like, if you look back at a guy like Schumer, I don't give him any credit, but also I mitigate my blame of him a little bit, which is this is a man who's been in elective office since 1975, right? Since the moment he graduated from Harvard Law School. I believe it's entirely possible, Annie, that he can't comprehend how to act or react in this moment, that there's a certain level of stasis that takes place in any of us when we do something for too long. And for him, that's where he is.
That is a totally plausible theory of the Schumer case. One of the chapter titles in our book is he says that once the Republican Party expels the turd that is Donald Trump, it will revert to being the old Republican Party. And there's just so little evidence to back up that theory.
It's a ridiculous statement. It's on its face.
It's a ridiculous statement. It's wishful thinking. It's just not happening. So that is a little bit like he indicates that he's stuck in a paradigm that just isn't the reality anymore. And look, I think that the position of Senate leader is complicated. And I don't think on the merits, there's plenty of arguments that he was right, that a shutdown would have been worse. But he misplayed the politics of it going in. And it looked like this was one of the real only moments that Democrats had to actually do something. And it looked like he just caved. And he would defend it as saying a lot of his members wanted to vote, did not want to shut down. He was protecting them. The job of the Senate leader is to protect your members from votes they don't want to take, to keep their seats, to rebuild the majority. So the job of Senate leader is a real inside game of it's not being the best communicator. Like Schumer knows that he's not the best guy out there to be messaging. It's the inside game of knowing your members and protecting them and keeping them together. Is he kind of past his prime and not of the moment right now? Like a lot of people think that, that's for sure. He's definitely like a face of Democratic leadership that is not popular right now with the party.
Right. Okay, guys, I've got like 90 seconds left with you. Luke, what's something that my viewers and listeners you might have written about, but they probably haven't heard, or something that you're looking at in particular right now?
We have so many great like anecdotes and inside the room stories in this book, many of which haven't gotten that much of attention. But if they really want to get a feel for how Congress really works, they should really dig into them. I mean, there's a whole chapter on a secret plan to make Patrick McHenry the speaker and how it was negotiated with the top Democrats, including Pete Aguilar, and things like that. You're going to see how Congress really works, how the current environment in Washington came to be, and why this House is so in the pocket of Donald Trump. If you read this book, so I would just encourage everybody to check it out.
All right. Annie, how about you?
I will also just plug the book saying, like, it will help you read about these people and feel like you really know them and understand why they're doing what they're doing. And we got lucky, I guess, in that the people we chose to follow for the past 2 years, they're still kind of the players of the moment. So, it kind of like, if you wanna understand this moment, it's kind of like brought to you by the 118th Congress. So, we loved writing it so much. I miss it. So I hope that some of our excitement translates to the reading experience.
It is a fascinating read. It is a fast read. It did keep me turning the pages and kept me highlighting like mad. So, Annie, Luke, thanks so much, guys. The book is Madhouse: How Donald Trump, MAGA Mean Girls, a former used car salesman, a Florida Nepo baby, and a man with rats in his walls broke Congress. It is available, gang, wherever fine books are sold. Before we get out of here, I want to remind you, as always, you can go to my link tree, link.tree/Reed Galen. Also, be sure to subscribe to my Substack, also called The Homefront. Check out says.us, SEZ.us, for a new social media platform for the sane people. And of course, guys, please visit jointheunion.us and sign up. Guys, we had 1,500 signups just last week. You can be one of those people. Guys, thanks for joining me.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Thanks again, everybody, and we'll see you next time.